My name is Hania Redfeather, a young tribal ranger assigned to a remote post deep inside the Great Smoky Mountains. When I first stepped out of the old ranger jeep, the air felt different, colder, thicker, almost heavy with memories that didn't belong to me. The station stood alone at the edge of a dense pine forest. There were no houses nearby, no tourists, no sound except the wind sliding between the trees like a long, tired sigh. I tightened my jacket and looked around, trying to shake off the strange feeling that someone, or something, was observing me from the shadows. As I walked toward my cabin, dried leaves cracked loudly beneath my boots. The sound echoed far longer than it should have. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, rising like dark giants guarding a secret no one had the courage to uncover. Inside the cabin, everything was old. A wooden desk, a metal lantern, a map pinned to the wall with faded tribal routes marked in red. Those markings were older than any ranger station, older than any official trail. They felt familiar, though I had never seen them before. I stepped back outside to inhale the air again. A thin layer of mist was forming across the ground. Even though the sun was still up, the forest stood unnervingly still. No birds, no insects, not even the distant rustle of movement. Only silence. A silence that felt alive. For the first time, doubt crept into me. Why did every tree look like it was leaning forward? Why did the air feel like it was pulsing? And why, deep inside my chest, did I feel like the mountains already knew my name? I had come here to work, but the Smoky Mountains, they were waiting for me. On my first evening at the post, I met Ranger Cole, the man who had been stationed here longer than anyone else. His uniform looked worn from long hours in the field, and his expression carried the sort of quiet that comes from knowing more than he chooses to explain. He handed me a cup of strong, bitter coffee and motioned for me to sit on the wooden steps outside the station. The sun was sliding behind the ridges, casting long orange strips across the treetops. Cole didn't start with small talk. He simply said, "There's one rule out here. Don't patrol after sunset." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He just watched the tree line as if expecting something to shift. When I asked him why, he didn't answer immediately. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then spoke in a tone that felt strangely practiced, like he had repeated these words many times. "Just remember this," he said. "If you ever hear someone calling your name from inside the woods, no matter who it sounds like, don't respond." His voice was steady, not dramatic, not exaggerated. It was the steadiness that made it stay with me. I tried to lighten the moment by asking if he meant coyotes or echo patterns. He only shook his head once, a subtle movement that carried far more weight than a full explanation would have. Before leaving, he placed a small leather pouch in my hand. It was an old tribal charm, one my grandmother used to keep above the doorway of our home. I hadn't seen one in years. "I found this near the northern trail last month," he said. "Thought it belonged to your people. Keep it close." I opened my mouth to ask how it ended up there, but Cole was already walking away, his boots crunching steadily on the gravel. He didn't look back, not once, and somehow that told me more than anything he had actually said. As dawn approached, the forest regained its stillness, and I resumed my patrol deeper into the restricted northern sector. This area was rarely visited. Dense undergrowth, fallen cedar trunks, and an old trail that barely existed anymore. According to local records, no one had officially walked this route in years, yet fresh impressions on the soil told a different story. They weren't boot marks nor animal tracks. They were something in between, wide at the toes, narrow at the heel, and too symmetrical to belong to any known wildlife. I crouched, touching the damp earth. The prints were warm. Someone or something had passed through only minutes earlier. Moving forward, I noticed subtle disturbances in the surroundings. Stones shifted from their usual positions, tree bark marked with thin vertical scrapes, and strange woven knots hanging from branches, made of dried river grass. These weren't random markings. They looked intentional, almost like signals meant for someone who knew how to read them. Halfway along the route, I discovered a campsite that wasn't part of the official ranger log. The ashes were gray but not cold. They held the last breath of fading warmth. A metal mug rested beside the stones, still moist inside. Whoever camped here had left in a hurry. No footprints around, no equipment, nothing that indicated a direction. But the silence felt loaded, as if the forest was holding its breath. For the first time since my appointment as a tribal ranger, I sensed that I was not observing the land was observing me. Every rustle of leaves felt deliberate. Every shift of wind felt purposeful. The deeper I walked into the Smokies, the clearer it became that I wasn't following a trail. I was following someone's message, and they had been waiting. Later that afternoon, while documenting the unofficial campsite, I noticed rhythmic taps echoing faintly through the trees. Not loud, just enough to register as a pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, repeated with uncanny consistency. It wasn't woodpeckers and it wasn't random tree branches. Someone was sending a coded signal. I followed the sound uphill toward a moss-covered ridge. The higher I climbed, the clearer the pattern became. At the top, I found a series of stacked stones arranged in a spiral. Each stone was carved with the same narrow vertical lines I had seen on the tree bark earlier. When I brushed away the leaves from the center, a wooden token appeared, smooth, circular, and marked with a symbol resembling an eye without a pupil. The tapping abruptly stopped, and for the first time I realized these signs weren't warnings. They were invitations. Back at the outpost, I dug into the tribal archive. Old Ranger Linton, who had served before my time, had once written about unclassified movement in the northern sector. The report had been buried, half the page torn off, the rest smudged as if intentionally erased. Only a few lines were legible. They used the land as a language. Signals appear before the watchers reveal themselves. There was no mention of who they were. As I cross-checked maps, I noticed a route that didn't appear on official charts. An older trail used generations ago by my ancestors. The symbols I saw in the forest matched the ones drawn faintly on that forgotten path. If someone was out there, they were using ancient tribal communication systems, and they wanted me to see them. Just past midnight, I woke to a soft, deliberate knocking, 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. The same rhythm I heard in the woods, now at my cabin door. I approached cautiously. No footsteps on the porch, no shadow through the curtains. When I opened the door, the forest stood still as stone. But at the threshold lay something impossible to ignore. Another wooden token, identical to the one from the ridge, but this time it carried a new marking, an arrow pointing east. Someone had come all the way to the ranger outpost without leaving a single trace. Not trespassing, not threatening, testing me. At sunrise, I headed east, following the direction carved on the token. This part of the Smokies was denser, untouched by tourism. The air here carried a strange calm, like the forest was aware of every footstep. Hours into the trek, I found a clearing framed by ancient oaks. In the center stood a structure made of interlocking branches, an archway shaped with deliberate craftsmanship. Someone had woven fresh green reeds across the top, forming the same pupil-less eye symbol. Strangely, there were no disturbances around it. No broken twigs, no footprints, nothing to indicate who built it. But the structure wasn't meant to be hidden. It was placed exactly where I would find it. Beyond the archway lay the ruins of an old wooden watchtower. Most Smoky Mountain maps labeled it collapsed, but someone had recently reinforced its base. New rope, fresh timber, clean cuts. As I climbed the restored ladder, I noticed movement deep within the trees below. A figure, still, silent, half visible between the pines. Not approaching, not retreating, simply watching. Their posture was calm, almost formal, like they were evaluating me from a distance. I raised my hand as a sign of acknowledgement. The figure responded by placing their hand against a tree trunk. A gesture, a greeting, a warning. Before I could interpret it, they stepped back and disappeared into the foliage without a sound. Back at the tower, I examined the carvings on the inside walls. They were the same symbols I'd found scattered across the forest. Only here, they were arranged in a sequence. A language. As I compared the markings with my ancestral notes, a pattern emerged. These were not symbols of danger. They were markers of passage signs used by tribal scouts centuries ago to communicate safe routes, gathering spots, and watch positions. Whoever was leaving them wasn't lost. They were following the old ways with precision, and they wanted a ranger who understood the land to respond. Before sunset, I returned to the clearing. A new token hung from the archway, this one carved with a single straight line. In tribal history, that line symbolized recognition. Someone out there had tested my observation, my heritage, my connection to the Smokies, and now they had acknowledged it. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of cedar and earth, I felt it clearly. I wasn't dealing with strangers. I was dealing with keepers of an older law, moving unseen but never without purpose. And tonight, for the first time, I wasn't just a ranger on duty. I was part of a conversation that began long before my time, and was far from finished.